Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you wherever you're tuning in from this beautiful Sunday. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate your texts and your tweets and your notes. I'm grateful y'all listening to the show and grateful for the feedback and for you sharing it with your family and friends. We've got a great show lined up. John Mates is here. John is, if you remember the social media platform Parler, John is the founder of Parler. It's unfortunately since been shut down. We'll talk about that. He's going to talk about free speech and the role free speech plays in social media, especially with what we're seeing on TikTok and Facebook and algorithms. A lot of really insightful content. And this is a guy who walks the walk, and I'm excited to have him on. Before we get to John, I want to talk about something pretty horrific. And, you know, I put out a post that went viral, but it merits discussing again. I don't know if you saw, but Nikki Haley, former presidential candidate for the Republican Party, who lost badly for obvious reasons, went to Israel and wrote a love note on the missiles being used to bomb Palestinian children. Something about America loves Israel, finish them, right? She wrote, finish them on these missiles, not bring home the hostages, not end the war, not finish the war, not even finish Hamas. No, finish them. And this was done just a day after an Israeli massacre of 21 Palestinians, and 2 days after an Israeli massacre of 45 Palestinians, 32 of them children, who were literally incinerated, burned alive, and decapitated as they slept. And this woman had the audacity to go out there and say, finish them. If this isn't genocidal intent and genocidal talk, I don't know what actually is. And what's really wild to me about someone like her saying this is, like, you're not white, and you will never be accepted by white supremacists, even though what you're pushing out is overt white supremacy, and that's what you've done your entire career for like decades. For example, when you defended the Confederate flag, an actual symbol of white supremacy terrorism, or when you were asked what caused the Civil War and you refused to acknowledge slavery as a root cause of the Civil War. And now you're doing it again. You're celebrating the mass murder of brown children, like you weren't a brown child yourself at one point in time. And you know what's really painful about this is that, you know, her parents are Sikh, S-I-K-A, it's a Sikh religion. We've had Sikh scholars on here before. It's a beautiful religion that teaches compassion and love and humanity and the sacredness of all life, like many religions do. And, you know, her father is an immigrant, and he was able to immigrate only because Black civil rights leaders helped pass the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. Let's not forget, May 26th is the 100-year anniversary, or was the 100-year anniversary, when the United States banned all Asian immigration, flat out banned it. Incidentally, because Thind was a Sikh American who said, I want citizenship, and Supreme Court said, nope, you have a beard, you're brown, you wear a turban, you are plainly not white, even though in the Supreme Court eugenicist definition of white he was. They said, but any common person would recognize you're not white, so therefore you cannot be a citizen. Oh, and by the way, we're banning all Asian immigration as well. And that was on the books until 1965, 41 years, until finally Black civil rights leaders helped push through this immigration reform bill, which makes sense, right? Because their whole premise was none of us are free until all of us are free. And as a result of that, Nikki Haley's father and mother were able to immigrate. Her father then taught at an HBCU of all places. This is the noble man who did good work. I don't know how they produce her, because now she comes and spits on everything they've done, undermines everything they've done, runs for office, says racism doesn't exist, and then engages in the most grotesque racist rhetoric out there. And so I put out a post saying, look, as a South Asian American myself, let me apologize on behalf of this woman who has no soul and no compassion and complete hatred for apparently her own people and for anyone brown. And that's exemplified by her actions, which is truly a shame to see. The broader question that we need to ask is, what will it take for the US to stop funding these Israeli war crimes? Because the people who were outraged over the fabricated story of 40 beheaded babies last October seem to have nothing to say about the horrifying reality of beheaded and burned babies happening in Rafah right now, committed by the Israeli military. It's deadly hypocrisy beyond the pale of humanity. I'm beyond disgusted at our failed media and politics, not just for letting this happen, but for enabling it, for funding it, for celebrating it. The dehumanization of Palestinians continues, and it's just mortifying to watch. It's mortifying to see. Israel's latest attack in Rafah was in a safe zone, an area that the Israeli military forced Palestinians to go to on the premise that you will be safe here. And then they bombed that exact safe zone. And what's truly wild about this is the Israeli prime minister and the Israeli military then gave conflicting accounts of what happened. Netanyahu claimed it was an error. He called it a tragic mishap. And the Israeli military said, no, this was a legitimate target. And so what if we killed civilians? It was a legitimate target. First of all, a tragic mishap is dropping a cake on a birthday party. That's a tragic mishap. A tragic mishap is not, oops, I just killed 32 children. Especially when it's not the first time you've done that. New York Times and NBC both have put out horrifying, detailed reports and analyses that show that on more than 200 occasions, the Israeli military forced Palestinians to go to a safe zone and said, you will not be bombed here, and then bombed that safe zone. Think about that. Another way to describe that is they corralled civilians to an area to bomb that area. And look, even once is one too many times. But to do this over 200 times, that's not an accident. That's intent. If somebody says, stand here and you will be safe, and then they shoot you, and then say the next person, hey, stand here and you'll be safe, and they shoot that person, how many times would you have to watch someone do that to say, hey, hold up 1 second, you're intentionally shooting people now? And that is one of the elements of genocide, that it has to be intentional. More than 200 times telling people to go to a safe zone and then bombing that safe zone. How is that not intentional? Last week, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to stop its invasion and bombardment of Rafah, ruling that Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which could bring about the physical destruction of the Palestinians, which is, of course, alluding to what constitutes genocide under international law. Minutes after this ruling was issued, minutes, the Israeli military defied the ICJ and launched another round of deadly bombings on Rafah, killing 44 people at least, and then the following day, killing 21 more people. And meanwhile, Palestinians continue to suffer famine. The UN has stopped sending aid due to the incessant Israeli bombing. The Department of Defense reports that 0 of the 569 metric tons of aid delivered through that stupid pier they built has reached starving Palestinians. A pier, by the way, which is now broken apart and has been washed away. $320 million just thrown away, flushed down the toilet. And meanwhile, no aid has reached Palestinians. 569 metric tons delivered, no aid reaching Palestinians. And people are probably thinking, oh, well, that's just Hamas. No. U.S. officials, the Guardian is reporting, U.S. officials confirm and local NGOs confirm that it's not Hamas blocking it, and there's no evidence of Hamas blocking it. Instead, multiple sources report that extremist Israeli settlers are blocking the aid, and they're being tipped off by the Israeli military itself. That's a war crime. That is a war crime. Recall that when Yemenis blocked ships to prevent genocide, they were bombed. And now, as Israelis block aid to enable famine, they're ignored as no big deal. This is the hypocrisy and white supremacy in our foreign policy. It is deadly. At this point, the question really is not whether Israel is committing war crimes. That's already been well established. The question is, how much longer will the US allow itself to become isolated on the global stage to protect Israel from the accountability for its war crimes? Because the United States is becoming increasingly isolated here. They can preach as much as they want about the need for international rules-based order and decency and humanity, but actions speak louder than words. And we need actual progress here. President Biden has said that Rafah is a red line, but with ongoing attacks happening in Rafah, he hasn't enacted that red line at all. There's tanks outside of Rafah right now entering Rafah, and somehow that's not a violation of that red line. Canada is now calling for a ceasefire. France and Germany have not only called for a ceasefire, but have publicly declared that Israel is violating international law and committing war crimes. Germany has gone on to say that Germany, I mean, they've been one of the staunchest defenders of Israel. They've gone on to say that they will arrest Netanyahu under its ICC obligations should he set foot in Germany. On May 28th, Ireland, Norway, and Spain, three more American allies, publicly recognized Palestine as a sovereign state. The US needs to act. President Biden has an opportunity to lean on the ICJ ruling and lean on his red line and say, well, the ICJ has ordered a stop. I've ordered a stop. I'm going to cut off aid because it's the right thing to do. He has a chance to save face and protect Palestinians. If he doesn't enforce the red line, the only red line left in Rafah will be the one drawn with the blood of innocent Palestinians. So I encourage you all to contact the White House, contact your U.S. Senator, contact your congressperson, and demand an immediate ceasefire and unconditional release of all hostages and accountability for the Israeli government on the tenets of justice, because this is what will protect Palestinians, it will protect Israelis, and it will protect international rules-based order. All right, thanks for tuning in. When we come back from break, I'm going to welcome John Mates, brilliant thought leader in the tech space. We're going to have a great conversation about free speech and technology. He's got a new social media app out called Hedgehog. I say new because he is the founder of Parler, which had more than 15 million users before it was shut down. And Hedgehog's got a really interesting concept on how it functions and how you gain followers. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break with Jonathan Mates. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm excited to welcome our guest this week, John Mates. Where do I begin? I mean, Scott, I can talk about his education background. I can talk about the fact that he speaks fluent German, and I'm regretting that I didn't continue my 4 years of German in high school. But John is an engineer and entrepreneur, former founder of, or I guess still founder of Parler, which is a former social media company we'll talk about. He's worked with General Atomics, Amazon Web Services. He's here to talk about free speech and privacy in the social media space. And we're seeing a ton of opinions on that, especially with what should we do with TikTok. We look at what Facebook has done and hasn't done with enabling genocide of the Rohingya. Most importantly, I think John would tell you he's got one child, a daughter, who I'm sure is just kind of the focus of his life as the father of a daughter myself. I can attest to that. John, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
I love this conversation about free speech, and I've written on this from an academic perspective, and published law review articles on this as well. And I've argued that our free speech laws are way out of date because they've all been crafted in a pre-internet era. They've all been refined in a pre-internet era. And what the internet has afforded us to do is the ability to influence and impact in ways that never existed before. And one of the examples that I often give is that we need to update our free speech laws with updated technology because that's what we've always done. A lot of folks don't realize that something as grotesque as child pornography was not banned until the 1980s. And then possession was not banned until 1989. And the reason why they were finally banned is because of the advancement of VCRs and the ability to duplicate. And the argument was made that even creation is damaging to a child, and then even possession is damaging to a child because it can be reproduced and the pornography can be reproduced and spread out. With free speech, we're seeing social media bring a whole new era of interaction between people. People can influence in ways that they never could before. Given your experience with social media companies, especially Parler, and I'd love for you to tell that story for our listeners. What do you see as the balance? How do we protect free speech and prevent harmful content? What do you think tech companies should be doing to uphold that balance?
Yeah, I think you brought up some interesting points with regards to free speech today. Some of the biggest issues with social media, in my mind, relate to children. And if you take a look at what's going on with TikTok, for example, and that whole debate today, really, it's yes, we're talking about the foreign influence of something like the Chinese Communist Party, but really it's their influence on children in our country. And no one's really doing anything to protect kids from, manipulative behavior online. If you take a look at what's going on Instagram, for example, 1 in 3 females or young teen girls will develop depression as a result of their time spent on Instagram. And if you take a look at what's going on TikTok, you'd have all of these challenges in addition to just the propaganda effect of TikTok. But you've had these challenges like the Tide Pod challenge and,
Yeah.
hey, go to your grocery store and throw milk down the aisle challenge and like stuff like that that are actively getting children to go out and do things, and not just young children. I mean, I'm talking like teens.
Yeah.
We have to be really careful about what we're subjecting our kids to. And I think with regards to social media, there is a decent argument to be said that this should be regulated similar to a drug or alcohol for children and teens, because there is a significant dopamine and psychological effect. And we need to have proper education in place there for that. So to at least a part of your question, I do agree that we need to have a bit of some regulation or updates to those rules for kids, especially.
Yeah, and I think that this Supreme Court precedent for that, to go back to this grotesque example of child pornography, it was actually not the 80s, it was 1990 in Osborne versus Ohio. In 1990, where the Supreme Court outlawed possession and viewing of child pornography, and this was 8 years after banning its production. So up until 1982, it wasn't illegal to produce child pornography in the United States. It wasn't explicitly forbidden. And by 82, the Supreme Court said, yeah, this is horrific and grotesque. There can be no tolerance for this whatsoever. This is not a free speech issue. and someone's so-called free speech of artistic expression or whatever BS excuse they have does not outweigh the fact that a human being, a child, a minor, is being harmed in significant ways that are in many
Yeah,
cases
ab-
irreparable.
absolutely. And there is, I'm happy that those laws have been put into place, and there's all
Yeah.
sorts of great tools out there today to help prevent that stuff from showing up on social media. Microsoft is a huge database that we can run all images against to make sure that if there's any kind of matches whatsoever to this data set, you know immediately that someone's been put in harm's way, and you can remove that content and report it to the FBI or whatever the
Yeah,
law enforcements are. And
absolutely.
so it is
I- I've
great
got, I've got,
that
I've
we
got
have
a,
some solutions for
clo-
that.
I've got a close buddy from law school who now works in law enforcement as an attorney, but for about 3 years he was a prosecutor with the Philadelphia's DA office, and he worked in the child victims unit. And he was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this because it is so mortifying. And I go back to that Osborne versus Ohio case in 1990 that banned even viewing child pornography. And what motivated the stricter regulation was technology, because video technology created an increase in the home production of child pornography. This was a development that had not been contemplated in the Ferber ruling in 1982, and it's the Supreme Court had to modify its free speech standards. So bringing it back to 2024, where we are right now, you're, a staunch believer in free speech. How do you view the role of tech platforms in moderating content? Should they have the authority to remove or censor content, and under what circumstances?
Yeah, well, technology companies have a right to free speech, and the founders of those technology companies have a right to free speech just as much as the people on their platform. And so we have some regulation in place in the country that helps, you know, facilitate social media. And this one of the most important pieces is Section 230. And
Mm-hmm.
Section 230 is a piece of regulation that basically says, social media companies, and it doesn't say this exactly. It's an older law that they've kind of interpreted in a more
Yeah.
modern way. But essentially, what it means for technology companies is you are not liable for the stuff that people are posting on your platform. So if someone goes out there and says something wrong, or somebody says something that's um, slanderous or whatever it is, you as a company are not responsible for facilitating that. Granted, there's still some assumption that you're acting in good faith. And so that allows social media companies to exist. So if you can imagine every single piece of content that everybody in the world can post, it doesn't make sense that the social media company is liable for it. So that allows social media to exist essentially. My issue with that interpretation isn't completely like I really enjoy that interpretation because it allows social media, like I said, to exist, but it also allows for abuse. So
Mm-hmm.
some social media platforms can use that exemption to start behaving like publishers, and
Mm.
that's where I have an issue. And so if you take a look at a lot of the way people's feeds are designed on social media, you know, Section 230 feels to me like if you're behaving like a neutral party and um, you're basically allowing your platform to be used exactly like a social media platform rather than a publication service, you shouldn't be liable. But if you take a look at what Twitter, Facebook, take a look at Instagram, even YouTube Shorts, TikTok, whatever it is, their feeds are very algorithmically driven. That's no longer, in my opinion, a social media. They've tweaked the algorithms in such a way where they are curating content for you based off of what's in their best interest.
Right.
So you'll see things like they push kind of content that gives you a dopamine rush, and they
Yeah.
push content that reinforce existing biases because you might engage with it more.
Yeah.
And that has a profoundly negative effect on society, but it does increase people's social media usage, and we found by about 30% by
Sure.
changing from a strictly chronological feed to an algorithmic one. I think this is where you start getting into well, what's acceptable now for 230? Are they behaving like a publisher by manipulating people, or are they actually a social media still?
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Jonathan Mates, a brilliant engineer and entrepreneur, founder of Parler, which grew to, I think, more than 15 million users before it was shut down for a number of reasons. And we're talking about free speech. And John, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I want to needle at that a bit more, because I understand your point about being a neutral arbiter of content versus a publisher that's pushing, particular aspects. They're going to argue, well, look, ultimately we're a business and we're trying to make, money, just like a store would facilitate more people coming into the store to purchase stuff, just like a website is going to try to facilitate increased traffic to buy stuff from us, use our services. We're the same way. We're ultimately selling ad revenue, and we can sell more ad revenue if we have, John and 30% more of his friends coming to visit our website. And I think that's an important conversation to have. To me, where I want to get your opinion on is, what do you do when you have a company like Facebook enabling the Rohingya genocide and admitting that, yeah, we didn't remove demonstrably false content and calls for violence, and in fact, we promoted it and it resulted in the genocide of the Rohingya people? How do we ensure companies face accountability, or should Facebook companies, in your opinion, companies like Facebook, should they face accountability for horrific atrocities like the Rohingya genocide?
It depends if they were directly responsible for enabling it. And I think it goes back to the discussion we just had a little bit on what's going on with these algorithmic feeds. And I think a US centric example could be when you go on Instagram. Let's say, I've heard of examples of young teen boys who are pretty impressionable being sent neo-Nazi content on Instagram, and they watch one video, and then suddenly every third video is neo-Nazi content. And maybe it's not at first directly glorifying those kind of ideologies. It might just be some jokes and some stuff that they think they want to send to their buddies, and then it gets more and more aggressive. That's the algorithm feeding on what they responded to, and inadvertently that's changing these young boys' views and making them more radical. I think your example of Facebook in Africa and taking some of these very real groups and coordination that's going on out there, and using algorithms to promote what is essentially violent or terrible ideas. I think that's when you get into the realm of, well, should they be liable for this content because they're no longer a neutral platform, they're actively promoting this stuff. Yeah. And I think it's the intent right there that's changed.
Yeah, I think it's very well said, John. And there's a phenomenal film, I don't know if you've seen it, called The YouTube Effect by Alex Winter. Alex Winter, you remember the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, right? So Alex Winter plays opposite Keanu Reeves, but he put out this film 2 years ago called The YouTube Effect, where he does a deep dive into YouTube doing exactly what you're describing, where YouTube will push neo-Nazi white supremacist content to young boys, particularly young white boys, and push them down this rabbit hole of extremism and radicalize them. And he kind of traces how this is not accidental. It's a very deliberate thing done by YouTube. And then the question he asks is, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to say, well, it's free speech, you can just push anything out there? Or are we going to recognize the actual harm being done? I recall, and Facebook, again, is not exempt from this. We talked about the Rohingya genocide. I remember during the 2016 election, I was watching this very closely. In Texas, you had Russian influencers or Russian bots or what have you set up an anti-Islam Facebook page in Texas. And then you had them set up a pro-Islam Facebook page, and you got people to fight each other based off of two fake Facebook pages being set up. I don't think that's free speech. I think that's manipulation and propaganda. And so then we get into this question about the legal and ethical boundaries. What is the answer? I mean, should there be like an independent commission that on a federal level that monitors this? Is it a state issue? What do you envision should be the legislative response to ensure that there actually is neutrality and there actually is a productive conversation being had, as opposed to, what you and I just described with the advancement of neo-Nazi content. Because there's free speech purists out there that will say, hey, so what if it's neo-Nazi content? Let's have a free exchange of ideas with Nazi content. What is your response to that?
I think a lot of it comes down to incentives. If the incentives are there for these social media platforms to do this stuff, they're going to do it. If it's going to affect their bottom line. My problem is that I would love to see I would love to see this addressed in a way where whatever is the correct and moral approach to this problem can be backed up by someone's bottom line. As in, if people are financially incentivized to do the right thing, then the right thing is going to come out of it. And we live in a chaotic world with chaotic markets. But at the end of the day, if Facebook wasn't incentivized to promote highly toxic content in order to drive revenue, they wouldn't be doing it. So how do
Right.
we change that incentive to make it so that people want to do the right thing? Me personally, when it comes to the new social media that I started, I'm trying to promote discussion, debate, and discourse on my platform, Hedgehog. In order to do that, we need to make sure the business model backs that up. If we can't make money doing it, it's not going to happen. And I firmly believe that a lot of discussion online today, especially on places like Twitter, is not productive. And we're seeing it have a massive effect on society. So if we want to change the way people are interacting online, we need to also change the financial incentives.
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, I can't disagree with you there. I think where I'm trying to figure out the path to get to what you're talking about, that's where I'm struggling from, because we know that negativity drives consumption, right?
Mhm.
Rage clicking drives consumption. There's a reason why um, a story of, two people becoming friends doesn't make headlines, but one person killing the other person makes headlines, right?
Mhm.
Look, we can talk about, I'm not a psychologist. I can't psychoanalyze that. I'm not going to even try to. But what we know is that negative media, negative stories, angry stories will generate more revenue, more clicks, longer attention spans than positive ones. So I guess where I'm struggling with, and I don't know if there's an answer for this, at least not the one that we'll resolve here, is when we know that all the algorithms, all the data shows us that Qasim and John are more likely to click and read something about a negative story than a positive story. How do we incentivize positivity? And then who defines what positivity is? Because again, just to be very blunt about it, the free speech purists will say it's all positive, right? I mean, so what if it's neo-Nazi content? So what if it's, genocidal content? The fact that there's an exchange of ideas, and we'll talk about Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance in a second, but the fact that there's ideas being exchanged is in and of itself positive content. So I guess I'm struggling with understanding, how do we incentivize positivity when negativity is kind of hardwired into our psyches?
Well, from a free speech purist perspective, the whole idea is that people shouldn't have their ideas banned. The idea behind free speech is actually one that's designed to protect minority views.
Right.
So whatever the smaller, less popular opinion is the one that's protected, because that um, who's to say that the majority is just inherently right and has the right to suppress somebody else? And if you think about movements like the LGBT movement, if it wasn't for the protection of free speech, movements like that could have never existed. They would have always remained minorities because the majority would have just stomped them down. And so
Right.
there is tons of value in free speech, and we need to protect that value. I think some of the problems that you're hinting at are not necessarily free speech problems, but rather we've created a place where there's no liability for people to be acting in a bad way, and being able to algorithmically do things that have adverse consequences. And I think that's, in my opinion, the biggest problem with regards to free speech on the platform side. What we've seen today in the technology space is there's a lot more competition out there in the marketplace for platforms, which is good because that means that we do have consumer choice and we can choose to reject companies that are doing the wrong thing. Is that enough? No, I do agree with you that
Yeah.
we should go further than that.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with John Mates. He is a brilliant thought leader, engineer, entrepreneur, creator of social media companies, working on a new company now that we'll talk about in just a second. And I like your analogy about the LGBTQ movement. I think you can add on to that about faith minorities in certain countries, right? Being an atheist in Saudi Arabia or Iran is a pretty risky proposition due to the oppression of conscience. There's faith minorities. I belong to a faith minority that's heavily persecuted in Pakistan, and there is no free speech, right? Our books are banned, our websites are banned and criminalized. And you're right, the need for there to be a free speech, for there to be an exchange of ideas is critical. And I think the examples we're giving are people just living their lives and not harming anybody, explicitly or implicitly or in any capacity whatsoever. So you contrast that with actual violent movements and organizations, right? What we're seeing with January 6th it's not free speech to want to overthrow democracy. It's not free speech to want to rush the halls of Congress and hang Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. There's a famous German philosopher, Karl Popper, post World War II, who talks about the paradox of tolerance, which suggests for our listeners that unlimited tolerance can lead to the extinction of tolerance itself if we're not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the intolerant. So the question is, how do you think this paradox applies to the tech industry's handling of free speech, especially on social media platforms? Should there be limits to tolerance when it comes to harmful or intolerant speech online? We mentioned the neo-Nazi content earlier. Should there be limits to that type of speech because of the fact that that speech stifles free speech or stifles the speech of other folks as well?
One thing I love about the United States is kind of economic incentives is that, you almost don't need any legislation to say, neo-Nazi content isn't allowed online because nobody wants to see it online. And so it's not financially wise for companies to allow that content to exist, and it will get blocked on almost every major social media platform, except for when there are little things like we discussed earlier when it slips through their algorithms and outside of their control and visibility. But in general, for the most part, if you look at the way people talk on social media, that kind of content isn't allowed almost anywhere because a majority of Americans don't want to see it. A majority of people don't like that content, and as a result, businesses will organically remove it and make it against their terms of service and their policies. With regards to unlimited tolerance, this is where we have to be careful. Who's to define what is intolerant? And once you delegate that to some sort of authority, you almost contradict the intent of free speech, which is to protect a minority opinion. Once some sort of committee exists to determine what is a tolerant view and what's intolerant and what's okay and what's not okay, that's where we have some issue. I think that a way to look at it and to modernize your Karl Popper's example is to say intent. What is the person's intent by saying that? Do they genuinely believe that, or are they trying to promote misinformation on purpose? And so if you say, like, you would also use some examples about Russian foreign influence creating these two Facebook groups you'd mentioned earlier to set them against each other. That's clearly bad intent, right? And so I think maybe we could change it from tolerance to intent. And I think that would be a helpful way to look at it.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting nuance. And the one area I would respectfully push back on is this assertion that neo-Nazi content businesses are just going to block. If you get a chance, definitely I think you'd enjoy the YouTube effect, where Alex Winter kind of points out that kind of content is actually incentivizing YouTube to push more of it because it creates more clicks and more revenue for them as well. And and again, I keep going back to this example because I think it's such a vivid and stark example of abuse of children, which I think you and I both are completely aligned, is there's no free speech when it comes to abusing children. And the data is actually pretty shocking. I'm looking at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and their data on online abuse in the cyber tip line. They are reporting that there were over 36.2 million reports of child abuse online. I mean, 36 million, and they were able to escalate more than 64,000 cases to get children out of those violent situations by getting law enforcement involved, and it led to over 1,500 convictions as well. And if there's anything that we've learned about law enforcement is that it's incredibly inefficient. And for every one conviction, there's hundreds of incidences that went by. And so again, here's an example where, I don't think an intent is enough, because what these folks will insist on arguing is that, well, our intent isn't to harm anybody. This is just, an expression of our free speech. And I guess part of it is I don't have an answer, because you're right. I don't like the idea of a couple of unelected bureaucrats sitting in a room deciding what is and what isn't tolerant, what is and what isn't free speech. It doesn't make any sense to me, because it could be abused very, very easily. But I think this is kind of what we're grappling with in social media right now. We're down to our last couple of minutes, and I wanted to make sure we talked about your new venture, your new project. What are you working on? How can folks get involved? How can folks support you?
Yeah. Well, if you've taken a look at kind of our country as a whole right now, we're a bit divided, and a bit is an understatement.
Yes.
I think the only thing people can, generally speaking, agree on right now is that they're not happy with either candidate running for president.
Right. Yeah.
At least broad scale.
Yeah.
But the debate online has eroded. You take a look at Twitter, which has become basically, or I guess Threads is kind of showing up now too, but Twitter still is the place where people are having their debates and discussions, and the quality of the discussion is really low. People can't talk to each other; they're talking at each other. They're broadcasting for their audience, and that's in general a big problem across all social media. And so what I'm out here trying to do is to create a place where people can talk to each other. And we're setting the example correctly by getting rid of these algorithmically driven feeds. You get what you sign up to see. We're creating groups where people can read the news and follow what they're interested in, but really have those discussions, which are important. It's a place for people to talk to one another, where the community's in charge. And so the more you engage, and the more you engage in good faith and you're active on the platform, you earn respect on Hedgehog. And as you earn respect, you get to determine what is allowed on the platform. So if you see something that you don't like, you can vote it off. And I think that sort of democratization will allow for scale, especially on social issues that no central authority can keep up with. And
That's
so when
amazing.
when you take a look at Facebook and how they've regulated a lot of these issues, it's consistently slow and a little bit behind.
Is this an app I can download? Is it just online? How do I get access to
Yeah,
this?
it's hedgehog.com, or you can go to the App Store. It's Hedgehog Social. And
Great.
you should be able to download it on the app stores. And
I love the logo
it's
too.
relatively new, and it's gonna be another fun long tranche, and getting this thing to grow and become a major app again. We were number one on the App Store before. We can do it again.
Absolutely. Well, I'm downloading it right now, so you got a new user from
Thank
me
you.
as well. So look at my content on there as well. John, it's been great having this conversation. I love this stuff, especially talking to people who don't just talk the talk but walk the walk. And I think you're leading by example. You're doing some great work, and it's exciting to see this new project. So you have my support. How else can folks find you on social media? How can they support you and support your work?
I mean, I have a Twitter now. I mean, I didn't for a long time. I had over 1 million followers back when I ran Parler, and that was a lot of fun. I responded to everyone's comments, at least 500 to 1,000 comments a day when I was on there. And I was so passionate about we're going to do this way that I didn't have any other social media platforms. So I've got a nice little like 500 follower account on
There we
Twitter,
go.
John_Mates, Matze. And then I'm on Hedgehog and Telegram and oh, I have an Instagram now. That's cringe. Ugh.
No, it's not crazy. Well, you're hip with it. Your daughter will appreciate you in a couple of years. And then you have your own podcast as well.
Yes, I do. That's true. Yeah, John Mates on YouTube and Spotify. Yeah, the Greater Perspectives podcast.
Excellent. So we can find you at John_Mates on Twitter and find all the other socials from there as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
John, thank you for being with us today, man.
Thanks for having me on. See ya.
I always appreciate bringing on thought leaders like John because it's rare to find people. And you guys have heard me say this on the show before that I don't really care for people who just have ideas. I want to see people implement those ideas. I want to see a proven model, and John's done that, and I've got a ton of respect for him for that. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break to wrap the show up. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was John Mates and his new social media app, Hedgehog. Check it out. I'm downloading it right now. It actually looks pretty fun. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully it's as popular as this last one and more successful. As we wrap up the show, I wanted to tell a kind of a bit of a funny anecdotal story. I was at an interfaith event and this person says to me, he was an evangelical pastor, and he goes, America has lost its way because she forgot Jesus. And I said, okay, that's pretty interesting. I said, as a Muslim, I love Jesus too. But help me understand, when was it that America was following Jesus? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you said we've lost our way because we forgot Jesus, right? And if we forgot Jesus, it must mean that at some point we remember Jesus and his message, right, of love and compassion and all that good stuff. I said, look, as a Muslim, I love Jesus too. So when do you think it was that America was following Jesus? Was it during indigenous genocide? Was it during the enslavement of Black people for centuries? Was it during Jim Crow, when there was, overt apartheid? Was it when we were invading Iraq and killing countless civilians? Kind of help me understand, when was it, right? Was the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, or 21st century? What was it? And this dude was silent. I mean, he looked at me like I was crazy. And so I posted this online, and somebody responded that, well, I wonder if we pose this question, what have the followers of the Prophet Muhammad done over the same period? What great countries have they built? What scientific breakthroughs have they made? What medical miracles has that faith developed? Crickets, huh? And this is where I'm like, guys, I'm begging you, if you're going to come for me, bring the receipts, because you're not going to like the receipts that I bring. So I responded, sure, let's talk about the 700-year era of Moorish Spain, which elevated Muslims, Christians, and Jews, where people criticized them for giving women too much influence. Let's talk about the fact that Muslims invented coffee, and our numerals are called Arabic numerals for a reason. Modern surgical equipments. Let's talk about how Muslims were inoculating almost a century before Edward Jenner's vaccinations. Let's talk about the toothbrush and miswak. Let's talk about bidets, hospitals, algorithms, the scientific method by Ibn Haytham, advances in optics and astronomy and chemistry and more. Like, my God, you guys read a book. And this guy I responded to literally deleted his account, which I thought was hilarious. But anyway, I wanted to share that because it's important we share our stories of our contributions to humanity and not let them be whitewashed away. We are facing some difficult times in the world right now, and I wanted to remind you all that we have a rich history that we should embrace and recognize, especially if we want to continue to build a positive future. All right. Thank you all for listening in. I appreciate you guys. Make sure you follow me on social media at Qasim Rashid. If you're listening on Substack, continue to support us there. I'm grateful for your support. You can subscribe to me on Substack as well for free, or should you be willing to give up a cup of coffee once a month for $5 a month as well. Be sure to follow me across social media at Qasim Rashid. I'm going to continue to advance a show that builds on compassion and justice and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up for next week as well. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place, at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, be fierce and lead with compassion and justice and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.